I hope you're enjoying this expert series of podcasts. So this is episode 3 in our expert series. So we've had an episode on anxiety. Highly recommend you go back and listen to that if you haven't already. One on toilet learning with a dad and a case study. And this one is going way down the other end, looking at taking students from school to post-school options, and particularly to a college environment and university. However, a lot of the strategies are really about independent living and even moving to work. Some amazing ideas and strategies. Now, one of the reasons I reached out to Dr. Perry to do this interview is that he has written some great stuff, and he's got a fabulous book called Taking Flight. But also, so many of the children I knew when they were younger are now at this age where their parents are like, Sue, how do we prepare our child for the next step? So I thought, well, why not? Let's get Dr. Perry on. He's someone whose information I really enjoy. He's very much like myself and a pracademic. Although he's a professor, he's very much a practical, hands-on, what can we do? And I think you are going to find it invaluable to hear his insights, He's got so many great strategies and ideas. And even if you're with a young child and you're not even thinking about post-school, it feels a long way off. I just found it very interesting. He was very interesting to talk to, and he shared lots of fascinating information. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sue Larkey podcast. As I always say, you have to embrace difference to make a difference. Let's dive into today's podcast. I am super excited to have Dr. Perry LaRoque on the podcast today. He's going to share his wealth of information, and we could talk about a lot of topics, but we're actually going to be talking about students with disability entering college, because although he's worked with all ages and stages, he's set up an innovative residential college to support programs for diverse learners. So can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sue. So let me back up and kind of tell you my path on how I got there, which always makes a little bit more sense. So I was a special education teacher, and then went back for my doctorate in special education. I enjoyed teaching. I loved working with the students. I just struggled with the system and found myself more focused on the problems and participating within the system than actually being able to really affect the change with the students that I thought needed to happen. And so I ended up being a professor for about 7 years, and taught future special educators here in the US. And it was through that experience that I started to realize that there was this gap of services for students who are college capable, but didn't have the specific skill set in order to support them being successful in college. And so 10 years ago, I started a program called Mansfield Hall. And Mansfield Hall is a residential college support program for students with autism and other related disabilities. And so you can think of it as like a super dorm. And so families generally find us first because their child has a need, they're college capable, but they might have some troubles with social skills or independent living. And then we work with the colleges in the area to sort of support them on their college pursuit. And so we have programs in Burlington, Vermont, Madison, Wisconsin, and Eugene, Oregon. And so in each of those places, the students live in the residence and they get all their services and supports from academic instruction to, social work type instruction, independent living skills instruction, social skills work. We have speech and language pathologists that we work with and sort of give the students the skills that they need to be successful in college. And then we coordinate with the colleges. We partner with them. We're not associated with them specifically. But we help them get to their disability services office and advocate on behalf of their needs for accommodations, help them problem solve, teach them problem solving skills and advocacy skills to really be successful in college.
I absolutely love these, because when I was reading and thinking about getting you on the podcast, sadly, I realized that many of the children I've known since they were 5 are now at that age that they are entering college, and parents are emailing me, asking me, for options, what they should do. And I just think you've got a wealth of knowledge you can share with us about how to make it work. And, you were saying, oh, I need to understand the Australian system. And I'm like, well, actually, my audience is worldwide. But I think in our way we are today, that the problems are the same no matter where we are, and the solutions too. And I'm pretty excited that you were saying about how, because I'm probably similar. I was in the classroom and I thought I can make a bigger difference educating the educators than a group of children. As much as I miss the children, I think sometimes someone has to step up and look at the whole system. So what are some of the things that can be done to prepare students for that transition, do you think?
Yeah, well, and I appreciate not having to fully grasp the whole Australian educational system. Although I've gotten better about the English educational system, so I'm starting to add country by country.
Well, actually, this podcast is like #1 in the UK.
Okay, there we go. So
I have a huge number of listeners in the UK. So yeah,
I love it. Well, we're actually starting a study abroad program in collaboration with the University of Reading next fall.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and so we're actually going to start our presence sort of over, in England, and start to ease the transition for our students to be able to have that study abroad experience, but at the same time, really start to understand the landscape of that educational system to see if something like this would make sense for students over in England. Which, again, like you said, the problems are generally the same, and I feel that has been something that has sort of drawn me to the topic. I mean, I went to the University of Wisconsin, which is a very progressive college. And so throughout my time, it's been sort of thinking about what is the area of discrimination or prejudice against students with disabilities, and how can we overcome that? And so college obviously is one of them. Study abroad programs are another, and sort of figure out how we, close that gap. And I had, about 3 years ago now, I had published a book called Taking Flight, which is the guide to college for diverse learners and non-traditional students, which is sort of, I use that language because one is that I think anybody could read the book and have it be beneficial for them if they're going to college. But then also, there's so many different ways that, the things going on in your life, or the person that you are, or the characteristics that you have, can impact how you do in college, that I thought it was really necessary to be able to get some sort of book out there in order to help families and students start to think about this transition to college. And so I'll say the biggest, to answer your question, I think the biggest challenge, and I'm assuming it is global, but for students who are coming up through elementary, middle school, high school in the US, and if they have a documented disability, they really get this full team of support around them in order to help them with what they need in school. Psychologists and occupational therapists and physical therapy. I mean, whatever, that really wraps around them really tightly. And you create these, what we call them, IEP teams, which are individualized education plan teams that help students to figure out how to kind of level the playing field and how we can help them learn based on their individual needs. And it's wonderful. And actually, because, you mentioned knowing people who are coming to college now, part of that is that I think we've done a really good job in, lower school, basically, in being able to help them kind of understand how they learn, help them look at the world in a way that creates optimism. And we set them down this pathway to be able to go to college based on their desire and their willingness. And then what happens is they go to college and they kind of get dumped out into a system that lacks all of the support they just came from. And so right off the bat, it almost like they have to start over, and they have to start over from a way that now they're driving the ship. Mm-hmm. So where they were in elementary, middle school, high school, they might have had mom and dad who were advocating on their behalf, and teachers and psychologists, and fighting the school for what they need. And the student was sort of a member of that team, but wasn't necessarily driving the ship. They weren't necessarily the ones that were doing it. Now, in good processes, we hope that we start to teach these kids these advocacy skills early on so that they're able to do it. But in many cases, it's the student doesn't have that opportunity to start to advocate for themselves and really understand what they need. And so when they get dumped out into college, they have to build that team around them all of a sudden. They have to start to reach out for services that they need. They have to start to recognize the struggles that they're having and figure out what they can do about it. And they might still have a really involved helicopter parent that's behind them. But with most universities, they want to hear from the student. And so the university has the expectation that if you want something, you need to advocate for it, not your mom or dad. And so that shift, that huge paradigm shift between that, high school into the college is just so dramatic for a student to be able to start to figure out how that they can be successful in a system that they are completely blind to. And so in the book, really the idea was, how do I help students kind of like demystify that whole experience? Like, how do we take out the unknowns of college and sort of make them more explicit? Like, how do we let them know what the hidden rules of college are? How do we help them understand the structure? And in the US, they go from teachers and principals to professors and deans. I mean, most students don't know that. And so to help them just sort of level the playing field in their understanding of what to expect around college, and to really just learn about the institution and the bureaucracy that happens there, in order for them to start off on the right foot so that they kind of understand the system they're entering into. But going back to your question, I really think that advocacy piece, students, when they leave high school, when they're going off to college, it is so unbelievably crucial for them to have those skills or be developing those skills and then to have a good coach or someone that's on their side to help them start to utilize them. Because if they're coming out without those skills and no one to support them, they're really at a significant disadvantage.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That there was so much in what you just said, and my mind was going to 100 different places, and I was thinking about different students. Because, like, for one of my students, Finn, school was very logical for a child on the spectrum or an autistic adolescent. Like you do in Australia, you do year 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Like it's just you number your way through the system here. Yep. When you get to university, not only is there 1,000 different courses to choose from, within those courses, there's 1,000 different subjects. And that in itself, without adding in what you were saying, like the different professors, deans, tutes, these are all new language. So is the book written for the student or for the parents or both?
No, it's a great question. So funny enough, when I had submitted the book to the publisher at first, what they said was, is there any chance you could rewrite it for the parents? And I said, no, I won't. And it's just because the belief is that the students have to do it for themselves. So why would I write a book to a parent to tell their student to do it themselves, right? Yeah. I wanted to speak directly to the student to say, this is up to you. You need to be empowered to take this challenge on, and you need to have the motivation in order to do it. And so the book kind of, I made it sound a little dry at first, but the book is about motivating people and giving them the belief that they are capable of doing it if they put their mind to it, that if they want to graduate college, there's a way for them to do it. They just need to figure it out. And they might have to be more creative than your traditional student. And so, but keep in mind, now I assume that all of our good helicopter parents here in the US are going to buy it for their kid. And then they're going to tell them to read it. And then they're like, well, I know they're not going to, or they're just going to skim it. So I'm going to read it for them and tell them everything. So I also kept in mind that there would be a parent behind their back reading it as well. So it was written for the family, but it's in the voice to the student.
Yeah. I really love that it's for the students, because many of my students don't want to listen to their parents. They're normal teenagers, or normal hormonally and developmentally, where they want to be independent. So what sort of skills are they going to learn reading the book?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think right off the bat, I mean, I spend the first, I would say, third of the book sort of just exploring this idea of like school, right? And like characteristics. And so I've always subscribed to more of a characteristics approach to disability, that it's just one extra thing that you have as who you are. And I think that it's different, such a different perspective than like a deficit perspective, where like this is a bad thing that you have, right? It's just who you are, right? And everybody has their list of good things and challenging things, and that's just the way it is. In fact, Temple Grandin, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
I've done a course with Temple Grandin,
Yeah,
actually.
she's wonderful. And I actually did a podcast interview with her. And then I've run into her twice now in airports, which in the last time I ran into her, I was actually finishing up a presentation where I use her on one of my slides. I was doing a keynote at a college, and she was sitting behind me, so she could actually see her full picture on my computer screen on the airplane of her picture. And she
Bizarre.
said, and she leaned forward and said, "Well, what are you saying about me?" And I said, "Well, one thing that you said during your podcast, I thought was so interesting that it just stuck with me." And I said, "How do you want to be remembered? Because you're nearing the end of your career." And she said, "Well, I want to be remembered as a woman. I want to be remembered as a professor. I want to be remembered as an animal rights activist. And I want to remember as a advocate for people with disabilities." And I said that to her. She goes, "Well, what's so interesting about that?" I said, "Well, you didn't say autism.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't, we all think of you as this person who
Yeah.
leads in front with your autism." And she's like, "Oh, autism isn't the most interesting thing about me. In fact, I thought it was really helpful for the industry I was in. Being a woman was actually way more challenging than having autism in my industry." And so, that sense of like, she's just incorporated that as just part of who she is, not who she is. And so having students start to think from that perspective, about how that disability either holds them back or propels them forward, and really making them think about how those characteristics can help them and also how they can hinder them, I think is really, really important. And the idea is to normalize it, that it's just because you have a learning disability or because you have autism, or it means you just do some things differently, but we all do things differently. You just have a name to yours. And so really trying to empower them and inspire them in some ways to understand that it's not their disability that's going to get in their way. It's going to be the system that's going to get in the way. And what they have to do is use everything in their power, all the good and all the challenges that they have, to fight that system and push through it and work hard, and then they can do it. And so that was really the message that I wanted to start on, because the rest of it, I try to be funny. I try to tell stories. People say that it's funny, but but then when you're getting into like picking the right college roommate, or picking when you should be taking classes, or thinking about what kind of supports you're going to need, or being able to have, how do you develop self-awareness, or how do you fit into a group, or all these other things, those could be taken out of context, because what I'm saying is be yourself and do those things. I'm not saying try to be somebody else and fit into college. I'm saying make college fit into you. Don't try to fit into college.
I think it's so important. And also for the parents reading it, because I think as parents' biggest anxiety, all parents' anxiety, is their children when they go off to college or do that next phase of knowing that their child can be themselves. No one wants to that. I always say I'm happiest when my children bring home friends and I see the same child I know with their friends. I want them to be themselves, whatever that is, that they're not trying to be different around their friends. That for all of us, I think that's very true. So I love that. So in the book, it gives them those strategies, understanding it. To me, actually sounds like that pre-warning of what the transition is going to be like, what they're going to experience. What about the actual universities? Do you get into what they should do differently, or is that something different?
Well, fortunately, I know, because it is so above what the students are able to do. I mean, my hope is, right, we create all these soldiers to go out there and start demanding change, and then that's actually what gets the colleges to change. But what I've been fortunate about is that because of the book and because of the work I've done with Mansfield Hall, I've really been able to get out and actually speak to colleges on a more regular basis, and speak with faculty and academic services offices, and it's coming more. It's on the top of people's mind in the U.S. right now, because there is this huge wave of diverse learners coming into college, and so colleges are reacting to it. Right? They're saying, "Oh my gosh, I've got all these kids with these quirky behaviors or weird expectations from us, and I don't know what to do about them." And the college is kind of going, "We don't know what to do about it." So then they bring me in to try to give them an hour-long course or a 2-hour-long course, and I like how to work with diverse kids in their classroom, which I always kind of laugh and saying, like, here I spent 9 years getting my doctorate and undergrad, and you guys want me to sum it up in an hour? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of insulting to some extent. And so my thing is a little bit more of like, look at what are the pieces that support a student in college? Like, so where do they get hung up? At Mansfield Hall, we say our 4 core areas that we focus on are learning, living, giving, and engaging. And so the learning is obviously the academics. And so we have, help students with academics and accommodations and all those different pieces. The living piece is the independent living skills, but that includes like sleep hygiene and roommate relationships and paying your bills and laundry and hygiene and all of those pieces. And then the giving piece is about vocational skills. We require our students to volunteer in order to get a more of a world perspective, but also to start to build some of those transactional relationships that they're going to need to have. And then finally, the engaging piece of like the social part of college, having fun, going out, meeting people, finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or, all of the things that joining a club, getting involved in intramural sports. And in my view as a college professor, the students who are struggling in college were never struggling because the content was too hard, or rarely. They were struggling because one of those other 3 areas were out of sync. Yeah. They were depressed. They were sad. They weren't sleeping well. They had a messy apartment. They weren't making friends. They weren't doing enough on campus. They were doing too much on campus. I mean, it was all of these other pieces that they were trying to balance that were impacting their education. And so in my mind, it's a lot more important for students to think about and faculty to think about how are those other soft skills not supporting a student. And so for a campus, you can bring in every tutor in the world and it's not going to make a difference, right? Coaches might make a difference, but tutors aren't going to necessarily make much of a difference. It's thinking about how are students identifying when they're struggling? I mean, I often say, you guys all have these amazing services. And I'm not going to, put any of those down. You have writing centers and math labs, and you have counseling services, and you have doctors on campus. You have everything, right? But if a student doesn't walk through the door, it's worthless.
Exactly. And it's funny you're mentioning Temple, Grandin, because in the course that I created with Temple, one of the things she said is at university, she had to ask for help. And she had to ask for help early. Don't leave it too late. And she was, really talking about the importance of going to lecturers early and asking the questions. Don't wait till the day before, and really putting yourself out there and identifying that, which is what you're exactly saying, that they might be capable academically, but if they're not actually going and asking for help or seeking these, advocating for themselves, then the lecturers aren't going to notice that they're there, And
I often say too, I said, okay, if you're in the writing center and a student comes in and they say, I need help writing, right? The amount of energy and courage that it took for that student to get there is huge. And you got to value that. And then my always question is, are you willing to put forth the effort to follow them out the door? And if you're not willing to follow them out the door and you're trying to say that you're focused on retention, then you're missing something. And that is that follow-up piece. One of my colleagues, I've stole this from him because I think it's just genius. He's our admissions director. And he says there's only 3 questions you need to be on a college entrance exam. And that is, do you know when you're struggling? 2 is, do you know where to get help? And the 3rd is, do you know how to use it? And if you say no to any one of those 3 questions, you're going to struggle in college. And it's so, and I share that with colleges a lot, because I said, just knowing that you're struggling sometimes isn't enough. Knowing where to get that help, that's great. But then you know how to continue to use that on an ongoing basis to put all 3 of those things together. And oftentimes when we look at where a student is struggling on campus, it's one of those areas. Either they realized that they were going to fail too late, or they went to the writing center once and didn't go back again, or they knew they were struggling, but they didn't do anything about it. And they just kind of, isolated, having a college kind of understand from that student perspective of they want the help, they want to do well, they want to be supportive. As a campus, how do we try to integrate all of these services and communicate with all these services? And how do we help those students build those teams so that they can advocate on their behalf? And we have to switch the paradigm of my job as a professor is just to teach, right? Now that I just teach, right? Well, that's fine. Yeah. Really, you're responsible for student learning, and student learning involves a lot more than just teaching. And so as a professor, are you willing to take that extra step to say, hey, it looks like you're really struggling with writing, or hey, you've been seeming really depressed lately. Hey, I'm walking over that way. You want to come to the counseling center with me? I want to introduce you to the director. He's a really great guy. You can't just say you should go to the office, because that's so much effort that goes into that. So how does a campus, can we support those students to get what they need?
I love that. But I think those 3 questions is actually what the parents should be asking and getting them prepared for. Because I think in Australia, in our last 2 years of school, year 11 and 12, they would be skills you could be working on, because often for many of our students, they know they're struggling in a topic. They might know who to go to for help, but can they go there? Do they follow up? I think this is sort of, we can actually start that as part of our preparation in their last 2 years of school as part of that transition. But I also think that's important in the workforce.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same skill. That skill set is going to be any post-school option. They're going to need to be able to work out, if their boss asks them to do something, they're struggling. Who are they going to go to for help? Do they follow up on it? So I love that it goes both ways with that. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, and then, when we all get stuck in complacency, that's, everyone does. And most of us, many of us have figured out a way to kick ourselves out of complacency. And that is actually probably the most difficult part. I know I should do it. I know I should go exercise more. I really want to go exercise more. I just, it's like, how do you get?
Do not get me going on exercise.
Right. How do I do that next thing? And so it's not just you add a disability to it. It just makes it more challenging.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I love that. Now, I really appreciate you sharing your time with us. Is there anything else that you'd like us to take away, or anything that you'd love to share with us while we finish off the chat?
Yeah, I just, I think that, in general, for me, this mission of education is social justice. And I think that that's a universal mission for all of us who are in this field. And I think that college is that we can't start to give students hope and prepare them for college and then send them to a place that's not prepared for them. And so I think that we can prepare students on one side to get ready for it. But then on the other side, we really start to need to think as a larger society about whether or not colleges are ready to start to change their practices to accommodate this beautiful, diverse group of new students who are coming in that I think are going to be responsible for changing in the world in ways that other students haven't in the past.
100%. And I mean, if we look at the moment at some of the richest people in the world, Elon Musk, hello, We don't have to look far to see that we need diversity, whether you like Elon or not. He's doing some amazing things. And
different podcast.
Yeah, right. And so we have to, and I agree. It's so important that our students reach their potential and accommodating our diverse learners. But just what you said there is so right. But just going back to the thing you said about they get you in for 1 hour. This is my biggest bugbear, that a lot of students come out of university as teachers who have done 1 hour of special education. Yet our busy and complex classrooms have at least 8 diverse learners out of 30 in every room, and yet we're not spending 30% of our learning as teachers on diversity. So, that's really probably why I do the podcast, to try and skill up the teachers and for our parents to actually to give them the knowledge to be the advocate for their child too, because often the parents, when they get a child diagnosed, don't get a little microchip of information. So I'm hoping I can give them the skills too. And that's where I think your book's going to be an invaluable part of their toolkit. And as Temple would say, the loving push. Parents' job is to give the loving push. And I would love to see all my parents giving their child the loving push to go to college, because what a great opportunity,
Absolutely. And just to piggyback off of something you said, it doesn't make any sense that our teachers aren't trained in working with kids with disabilities, that we've separated those two areas out. In fact, when I was a professor in Vermont, I helped create the first dual certified program in the state for special education, regular education. So all of our elementary educators who were coming out had a special education license and a regular general education license. It just doesn't make any sense for us to say, oh, at this point, this is a student, because good teaching is good teaching.
Correct.
Good strategies are good strategies.
Yeah.
They work for all kids. Why would we reserve them for one portion of them? We should be teaching it to all teachers, and I think everybody would be better for it.
I know, it's so true. And I mean, I cannot tell you how often I run a training session and there'll be, a teacher will come up to me at the end of the day and go, I've been teaching for 30 years. This is the best professional development I've ever done. It works for all the students, right? I hear that every week. But it's because I have a special education background and they've never heard this before. They didn't hear it at uni. They haven't heard it any other profession. It's not the teacher's fault that they've been teaching for 30 years and haven't heard it. But the truth is, how sad, they've been teaching for 30 years. How many students have they taught? At least 1,000. And suddenly, they get this information. Imagine if they'd had it at uni. It's so wrong.
Or just even the mindset. Just the mindset of problem solving difficult cases, where there's smart people, and some of these things aren't rocket science. I'd say this to my employees all the time. It's not rocket science. It's just what's getting in the way and how do we get around it?
100%. And that's sort of my motto. Armed with the tools of understanding, so much can be achieved, and it is the tools of understanding. So you can look and go, okay, because a child coming into your classroom just with a diagnosis or a child coming into university just with a diagnosis isn't enough. You need the knowledge to apply to that situation. So I love that. Yep. Well, look, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight. I'll link to your book and all your things on the podcast notes. But
thank you so much. It's good to talk to you from the other side of the earth. And
aren't we lucky? We love this. And good luck with the exchange to the UK. This is really exciting.
Maybe I'll meet some of your listeners next year. Looking forward to it.
That'll be amazing. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Sue.
I hope you've got some great tips and strategies to make a difference. Remember, strategies wear out and not every strategy works for everybody. If you're ready to dive in deeper to more strategies and ideas to make a difference, I'd highly recommend you consider Dr. Tony Attwood or my online courses. For more information, visit my website www.suelarkey.com.au.